Welcome to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
I want to welcome everybody to this month's Calibration Point episode, and I'm very excited to have a longtime friend and colleague with us, Elisabet Sena-Martin, who is a immigrant community organizer. I love the focus of that, Ellie, and I'm super excited to have you on for another topic to really look at the impact of immigrant communities on community philanthropy, which is often not fully understood either by the immigrant community or the people who are already in a community in the nonprofit space. And you are perfect to help us really start to define what we can learn from this. So thank you for taking time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So help us understand a little bit about what you're seeing as an immigrant community organizer. Maybe share a little bit about just your experience coming to the United States, and we can then bring that into modern day philanthropy.
Yeah. Well, I came to the United States as an international student about 22 years ago here to the University of Evansville. And I came supposedly just to study, go home, continue my life as is. But as many people know, when you're 18, life just takes different shapes and forms. So I met my current husband while we were in college, and we decided to get married. So he convinced me to stay. So my immigrant story was a little different than maybe families who come as adults or professionals that come specifically for work, because I came very young and kind of on a different path. But I did come from a background of faith-based community development. So my father was an executive director in the Dominican Republic for Food for the Hungry, and also a regional director for several other country-based chapters of Food for the Hungry in Latin America. So I grew up kind of in that interface of community development and philanthropy and getting involved and bringing together the church, the community, and then outsiders to support common goals and kind of improve the community. So I grew up watching people doing that. I was a volunteer team translator for mission teams and, translator for home visits. I translated many a church or community meeting where people were deciding on what do we do next in the project. And so part of my journey here in the United States has been as an ESL teacher and then connecting with others in the multilingual student space to improve things. So this is a very natural, getting involved now with other immigrants in my community is kind of a very natural overflow of who I am, both where I grew up and what my parents were doing, and then my career in education as an ESL teacher.
Wow, that's excellent. So yeah, you are well-versed from a multinational perspective in philanthropy and in community engagement as a whole. So what are you starting to see? Like what, as you're now really in this community organizing space specifically for immigrant communities, and then how we engage and empower and learn, what are you starting to see and learn that, the as you're finding even just in the metro area you're in, that the local nonprofit leaders need to better understand?
Yeah. Well, I would say I lived also in the Northeast in Massachusetts for graduate school. But in Evansville, I do feel like the number of nonprofits and I would say philanthropic-minded individuals sometimes feels higher than average. So there's lots of opportunities where I see connections. But in terms of our own immigrant community, up till now, we've had small pockets of kind of immigrant leaders dealing with needs. So sometimes it's basic needs like newcomer families need help finding housing or healthcare, basically connecting to the services that are provided either by the local government or private entities, public school registration. So then there's one path there. We also have kind of professional immigrants that are in our industries here, and sometimes they're just relocating and need a community and ways to get plugged in. And for the past, I would say 20 years, we've had such an increase in the immigrant populations in Evansville that now we're beginning to see the need for systemic change. So not just what I used to call it, the phone tree help, there's a new family. Oh, call Ellie, She works at Oakland City University. We have a student that might want to enroll. She knows what to do and we'll help him figure it all out. Oh, call Guillermo at Echo Health. He knows how to connect this Hispanic family to community healthcare, because the sheer number of immigrants in our community is too much for that kind of ad hoc support. And so we've seen the Haitian Center started about a year and a half ago. We have now a Marshallese nonprofit, and those are two pretty fast growing immigrant groups in Evansville. We've had a couple of Hispanic serving nonprofits, but in the larger ecosystem of nonprofits in Evansville, we also have a lot of nonprofits that are serving more and more Marshallese, Hispanic, and Haitian population members, either through healthcare, or it might be in our schools, after school programming at the Y or Boys and Girls Club. And many of these organizations are saying, oh, we don't really know how to connect with Marshallese families. The Marshallese are from a Pacific Island. Even I, as an ESL teacher, did not know anything about their culture. The first time I had a Marshallese student, I had to learn, they're a pretty oral culture. When I just send papers home, some of them don't even read their own language, even if I went through the trouble of translating. So as our community has evolved, many more people are now paying attention to this question of how do we engage with the immigrant community, both in the serving side, but also in the leveraging the potential that is there for workforce development, for business growth, which are things we know in cities as immigrant populations grow, expand, because immigrants come to work and they come with a lot of work-face values and to make a better future. So many of them are entrepreneurs. Many of them are trying to start afresh with whatever little bit they have here. And so we know there's both need, but also potential.
That's fantastic. And it really, listening to you hits on just a really important perspective you identified. And that is that if the challenges that I may see, say, with an immigrant family in a school district, also carries over to the same kind of challenges I may have as a nonprofit provider who wants to engage someone out of the immigrant community just to be a part of something they may love and share, but we don't know how to connect with them. Or, to your point as well, maybe we're not intentionally finding the right pathway to be able to connect with them either. And just from what I've gathered from what you've said so far is that if we're not intentionally organizing immigrant communities within a metro area, or even a rural area, then it's going to become more and more difficult, not just for the nonprofit provider to know how to connect people who may love what they're about, but also for those families to find meaningful ways to engage in just the overall philanthropic culture within whatever region they might be living.
And I think that engagement piece, goes both ways, both, at least for Evansville, some of our local and regional hopes and dreams are population growth, talent recruitment and retention. So in that sense, systems and strategies and individuals that help newcomers integrate and navigate our system is a win for the region. And on the flip side, it's also a win for families, because we do have people who relocate to Evansville. Maybe they have another immigrant friend or relative that comes here and tells them, this is a great place to live, the cost of living here and the jobs and it's welcoming. But then newcomers face barriers and challenges and they decide, you know what, maybe I should move to Chicago or Louisville or somewhere where there are more people like me, where it might be easier for me to find the kind of job that I want, the quality of life, amenities that I'm looking for. And so you end up losing potential if you're not organized to welcome and retain newcomers.
So tell us about what you've experienced. And I'd be curious, both in the Dominican Republic and also in the States. So what we know about immigrant community members by way of the monetary side of philanthropy is that and the number I've seen, and I don't know the exact number right now, but the conservative number that I've seen in research is that immigrant families in the United States give conservatively $50 billion plus in monetary support to family members outside of the United States. And that could be going to sometimes community-based organizations, or maybe going directly to family members. But that's obviously monetary philanthropy that's occurring that is not documented through the IRS. They're not getting charitable deductions, et cetera.
Right.
So we know that immigrant families are very generous.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about immigrant families and their either desire, willingness, or activity in supporting domestic organizations as well, not just giving outside of the United States, but in their desire to also support the nonprofit structure in the United States?
Yeah. I would say, to your point about immigrant families being generous, many families come here to the United States for the opportunity to earn more, to have better jobs and life for their children, with the clear intention also of elevating their families in other countries, sometimes
Right.
bringing their family members here. And through those interactions, they do connect with nonprofits and the philanthropic sector. There are refugee agencies and sponsors. There are churches that do a lot of work in kind of that resettlement world. There's, like I was mentioning here, many immigrant serving organizations, and to the degree that immigrants connect with them and interact in either bringing new family members or helping others, they're donating and contributing there. I do know, for example, in the Dominican Republic, the remittances part of the economy is actually a sizable chunk of the gross national product, so our GDP. But as family members switch around and change, sometimes that means now I'm sending money to Massachusetts instead of the Dominican Republic because I have a family member who's relocating there and is new.
Right.
And I get connected to an organization that was helping them, and now I'm donating to that organization because I know that they're bringing more Dominicans and helping them, or Ukrainians or other refugee groups, as we see with situations around the world, how that can be mass migration from specific places. And I would say, at least from the Latin American experience, many Latin Americans are Catholic or also evangelical. The component of the faith-based philanthropy there, so giving to the church for their charitable work in either country, is also very important. And we're seeing more and more ethnically based churches in Evansville. There's Haitian churches, Hispanic churches, Marshallese churches, all involved in supporting their immigrant members. And there's a lot of philanthropy going on there, kind of as a first line of defense from the church for newcomers.
Yep. And to that point, I mean, no matter what our worldview is from a religious perspective, whether it's a church, a synagogue, a temple, etc., places of a mosque, places of worship create community. And what I'm hearing from you is that immigrant families coming in want community, and they will create community with wherever. I would anticipate, I can only speak, my dad was an immigrant, from his perspective, wherever is the safest and also the easiest to create community. And what I hear you saying is that if we can make it easier for community to form with immigrant families, then it's also easier for us, if I'm the local outreach center or a local mentoring program, whatever it might be, then it's easier for me to also become part of that community because now I can start to see it. But if we're not organizing, and then I don't know the map of how we're creating, like just what you just said, if I don't know that there are now ethnic-based places of worship, then it's even more difficult for me to know how to create community with a family person who maybe I just met in my neighborhood, who might be from a different country.
Right. Yeah. And I would say in the ways in which our different circles within community interact or don't overlap, faith-based places and community, that's an entry point. But sometimes, as you say, people relocate for work and they have no connection to kind of the local faith-based group. They're just going to meet people at work who may or may not be able to direct them to other ethnic groups that were there before. I would say also on the flip side, and I remember as a new immigrant, the overwhelming feeling of the language and in school and meeting people constantly. And I'm an introvert, like I needed some time every day to just kind of sit in my dorm room and be quiet for a little bit. I think sometimes ethnic groups can self-segregate at first because it's comfortable. And eventually, once they want to venture out and see, well, what else is there? If they have good other networks and word of mouth opportunities, and if they get opportunities to meet people outside their initial circle, then that integration process works pretty well. But if they don't, and many times we know they don't, but they know maybe one person or two, then it's really difficult to integrate even many, many years later. They can feel isolated, and in many ways, their contributions, right? What they could have brought to the larger community, both in their ethnic groups and the community at large, get lost in that shuffle. So yes, we are kind of working to organize ourselves in a way as migrants to participate, and in that interaction, bring along people who are already serving in the community and connect better with them, so we can kind of create those pathways to facilitate those interactions for the betterment of the whole community, not just immigrants and not just the community that was here already.
Right. So it seems then, listening to you share with that, one of the things as a nonprofit leader that I should pay attention to, and many, if not, I would say the majority of the nonprofit sector does not do what I'm getting ready to say, but it sounds like what you're saying is there's a lot of value in it. If we think this way, I really ought to start to map out the profile of our relationships within our organization, donors and volunteers, ethnically as well, so that I can actually create greater unity and community within my entire donor base and ensure that people aren't being overlooked. And if I wonder if I've got a Serbian family that's giving to my organization, I probably ought to decide if understanding that more is going to be a priority to my organization.
Yes. And I would say there's opportunities both on the volunteer and the donor side to, if you're thinking about cultivating relationships that will be long-term, benefiting both the donor, volunteer, and the organization, you do want to learn what their communities are like, and you want to be that extra value of building additional community. Otherwise, that family may decide not to really stay in your community anymore. Go find places where that can happen, organizations where they feel welcomed in that way. And in a way, I think all immigrants have that identity development mediation. You go through the initial culture shock, then you might have a little honeymoon period of everything is wonderful. And then you're like, no, not everything's wonderful. I have these things from home that I can never find here, and making peace with that, takes longer or shorter. But to the degree that we can support people going through that journey, we become kind of their extra family in new countries. And I was very fortunate that because of mission work from people in Evansville in the Dominican Republic, when I came to Evansville, I already knew people who knew my family and loved my family. So I didn't come as a brand new person. There were already people here praying for me, people here ready to pick me up from college and say, do you want a home cooked meal? Do you want to get out of campus? What are you doing for Thanksgiving break? So I had a much easier path, I would say, in that identity development as an immigrant than someone who comes and doesn't know anyone else. Right. And that could be a very successful professional in their own country who comes here and has a really hard time adapting and bringing their family. And it could also be a person who's coming as a refugee with trauma, etc. But eventually they will migrate and look for places where they feel like they can belong and where they can be as they were, maybe in their own culture and in their own place of origin. So human beings are created for that kind of connection. And I think when we do not, as a community, put the effort into creating that for newcomers, they will default to places where that happens, organizations where that happens, and groups of people where they feel that level of welcoming. And that can have impact for economics. It has impact for mental health. It has impact for population growth, all kinds of bits and pieces. And I would say, coming from an island, that we've had a lot of immigration because in the 20th century, the Dominican Republic is a great place to hide after world wars. It was a great place to go and start from scratch. There's no winter there. Things grow. You could farm. You could do manufacturing. Yep. You could be a Japanese person escaping the results of World War II in the middle of the mountains in the Caribbean. And so we also have a very eclectic population over the years where people have mixed in, have decided to stay because Dominicans are welcoming and you can navigate the system. So I've seen that in my own country. And now we have a lot of Venezuelan immigrants. We've had a lot of Haitian immigrants. And somehow all that builds into our industry and infrastructure. Yeah. And of course, the U.S. has even a longer history of building a country through immigrant work, philanthropy, and community. So I have great hopes for the work that we're doing, even if it's pioneering in a way. And I do feel like we're getting to those spaces in a way of tipping point for our community where the number of people coming and settling here now all of a sudden make a good case for better integration and support systems.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, so one, I appreciate that. And I think if I were to kind of land the plane with a couple of key points, if I'm a leader listening to this, I think number one is I need to spend some time learning about what's happening by way of migrant or immigrant community organization. And I would also say understanding the migrant flow into a region can be as important as well for another host of reasons for the things you talked about, still building community and understanding, even though someone may be in my region by way of a seasonal relationship as opposed to permanent. It helps me better understand even what immigrant organization can look like. So I think one, know what's going on by way of ethnic organization in my neighborhood and my community, whatever area my organization serves. And then secondarily, I think make sure that we bias ourselves with the assumption that immigrant families want to engage, they want relationships, they want to be a part of the local civic structure. And then number three, I think what I'm hearing is that my organization, especially if I'm taking the time to think about my relationships, my donor base, my volunteers, from an ethnic perspective, understanding, do we have people who are first or second generation immigrants that are here? How can we become a hub to help people within our own relationship base find community themselves and not assume that it's already happening outside my organization? Yeah. That's powerful. Very powerful.
And I would say those things require intentionality. They don't just happen naturally in the regular flow of affairs because we come to it with our own American and local based cultures and people are coming from other points of view and cultures. So that requires taking a particular approach and stance of learning, of being open to people being different, and then being willing to, walk with people in that journey to figure out what maybe the new version of our community looks like. I say to a lot of people, when I started teaching, one of 5 ESL teachers, I had an idea of what schools look like, what ESL programs look like. And now when I walk through schools as president of the EVSE Foundation, I was thinking, this is very different. This is a very different school district. Therefore, I know it's a very different city. It looks different now than it did 20 years ago. And it's continued to grow in that direction. It's not looking like it will go back in time to what it used to be. It is growing to be more diverse. And so if we can be strategic about it now, we can reap the benefits of it in the future.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to close with the last thing you said, and that's intentionality. Mm-hmm. I got to decide as a board, as a executive director, program director, staff member, development, whatever my role is, are we willing to be intentional about this understanding? Ellie, thank you so much for being with us. This was super informative, and you bring a dynamic that we've never been able to look at with this lens before. So I so appreciate that. And thanks again for being with us.
Yeah, and thanks for having me as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.